gentlemen, I'm very, very pleased and excited to present our first speaker this evening. This is Steph Killingbeck, who is going to be speaking about a life with less. So can we please give Steph a very warm welcome.
Climate change on that journey and how our sort of consumer fuel lifestyles are aiming at this crisis. What has been fantastic is to see a growing awareness that we are in fact facing a crisis and greater coverage of this in the media over the last year or so. However, I think we need to be very careful to ensure that this long overdue conversation doesn't remain just that, words, but it is turned into actions that are both big and small. And of course, in order to get to the root of the climate crisis, in order to really tackle this, we are going to need wide-sweeping, drastic changes brought into play by our government and being upheld by corporations. But I in no way think that undermines the importance of our own personal individual changes. And one of the reasons I think our own changes are so important is because I don't think the changes we really need to see being inputted by our government and being upheld by our corporations are going to be easily won. We've seen time and again that profit is prioritised over people and planet. And I think it will be us, I think it will be citizens from across the world who are going to be responsible for holding these organisations to account. But in order to do that, we need to feel empowered. We need to have the knowledge to stand up and to demand this level of change. And getting to that point will be different for everybody. But for me, getting to a point where I felt ready to join with others, to stand up and to say, enough is enough, we need to see drastic measures being implemented, came about initially through a process of small individual changes. Changes which helped me to grow, to understand, and to feel confident enough to take that next step. And for me, those initial steps came about by taking part in the Plastic Free July Challenge in 2016. And at the time, I thought I was leading a relatively environmentally friendly life. But actually taking part in that challenge opened my eyes to something that I'd only been vaguely aware of before that. And that was the problem with plastic pollution. Suddenly I was seeing it everywhere, and it sparked a desire within me to understand how had we got to this point? How had we got to a point where we have produced so much single-use plastic that it was choking our earth? And what could I do? How could I change my behaviour in order to contribute less to that crisis? And so that set me off on a journey of discovery. And in starting to research and to look into other things, all sorts of other issues started to surface, which all broadly came under that umbrella term of climate change. So before I jump in and talk about climate change more generally, I thought it would be interesting to share some of those plastic stats with you, some of those things that I first came across that really sparked that desire initially to begin exploring less waste, a zero-waste lifestyle, more recently to engage with environmental activism. And I wanted to share these with you because I think in and of themselves, these statistics are fairly shocking. But once we realise that this is just one element, one thing that we need to change in our fight to protect our natural wonders, then it really does put into perspective the sort of challenge we have ahead. And I hope galvanises us all to make the changes that we need to see. So the statistics that I'm going to share with you mainly come from the organisation Surfers Against Sewage. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with them through the Plastic Free Letchworth and the Plastic Free Hitchin initiatives. If you haven't come across them before, they're a Cornish organisation that empowers communities to come together and tackle the problems that we face with plastic pollution in order to protect our waves and our wildlife.
So let's jump into those stats. Plastic pollution can now be found on every beach in the world, from busy tourist beaches to uninhabited tropical islands. There you go. Next slide. Scientists have discovered microplastics embedded deep within the Arctic ice. In 1950, we were producing around 2 million tonnes of plastic every single year. Fast forward to 2015, and that figure has increased 200-fold to 381 million tonnes of plastic. To put that in a bit of context, since the production of plastic began, there are around 7.8 billion tonnes of plastic that has been produced, the equivalent of around 1 tonne of plastic for every person living today. Every day, around 8 million pieces of plastic pollution find their way into our oceans. And plastic consistently makes up 60 to 90% of all the marine debris that is studied. Around 5,000 items of marine plastic pollution have been found for every mile of beach in the UK. And for each mile, around 150 plastic bottles are found to litter our UK beaches. And the final stats I wanted to share with you are about the impact that we are having not only on the planet, but on all of those other creatures that we share this earth with. So recent studies have shown that marine plastic pollution is present in 100% of marine turtles, and 59% of whales, 36% of seals, and 40% of seabirds that were examined by the scientists. And 100,000 marine mammals and turtles and 1 million seabirds are killed by marine plastic pollution every single year. And as I said, the misuse of plastic is not the only area that we need to consider when we're thinking about our impact as human beings on this earth. And so I'd like to have a think about climate change more broadly before we look at how consumerism is impacting on this crisis. So I think the first thing to recognise is that our actions are not carried out in a vacuum. Everything we do has a ripple effect. All of those actions spread out across the world. And I think a really visible way of thinking about this is the extreme and the more frequent weather events we have been experiencing. It's just a really visual reminder of how interconnected we all are. But of course, our actions are not just affecting ourselves. We're currently experiencing the 6th mass extinction in our Earth's history. We are losing species at a rate of 200 species a day. Our oceans are becoming increasingly acidic as they fight to absorb the excessive and increasing amounts of carbon dioxide that we are pumping into our atmosphere. Those greenhouse gases, of course, blanketing the Earth, creating rising temperatures and rising sea temperatures, and those things combine, creating a really difficult environment for animals living in our oceans. And I think here, the coral bleaching is a very dramatic representation of that. The stresses that this incredible natural wonder is experiencing and not being able to deal with is causing this mass die-off of our coral reefs. The ice caps are melting at a far faster rate than scientists predicted, and with that come numerous problems. As this fresh water enters the ocean, it is changing the salinity and again causing real difficulties for the creatures that call that environment home. Of course, it's causing the sea level to rise, impacting on low-lying and island nations. And of course, mammals like the polar bear that use the ice caps to hunt and fish are impacted by this. And most recently, we've heard that permafrost is now melting as well, and with that, releasing methane gas. something which of course we know is far more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Our rainfall patterns are being affected, with both drought and flooding becoming more frequent and more severe, and this will only continue to increase the difficulty of growing food. Our air quality is becoming increasingly compromised, not only in places like Beijing, where you can see the smog visibly hanging over the city, but here in the UK, we frequently breach harmful particulate levels in our big cities. The rainforest, which houses 1 in 10 of all known species on Earth, is being cut down and burned at an alarming rate, around 2,000 trees, the equivalent of 7 football pitches a minute. And of course, when we burn these trees, they release all that carbon dioxide that they have been storing on our behalf back into the atmosphere. And with far fewer trees to reabsorb that, we are putting ourselves in a perilous position. Added to which, of course, much of the land that is cleared is then used for raising livestock, those livestock contributing to the greenhouse effect through the production of methane. And of course, we are going to see increasing number of climate migrants, people on the move because the places they call home are simply no longer livable. So you might wonder, how do my small choices as a consumer link in to these huge global disasters that I'm describing? And the answer to that is the materials economy, the way that we make our stuff. Currently, we use this linear system where we extract at one end, we pump it through the system, and we dump it out at the other end. What a less wasteful, zero waste approach encourages is a move towards this more circular economy, something which feeds back into the system and closes the loop, rather than being continually extractive. So let's have a think for a moment about this linear system. How does this work? Well, at the moment, it begins with extraction. And this is where we extract those raw materials. We cut down trees, we use water resources, we mine for minerals, and sadly, we wipe out species. And this is where we hit our first problem. We're currently using up those finite resources at a rate of around 1.7 planets per year. You don't need me to tell you how unsustainable those numbers are. So once these materials have been extracted, they go into production. And this is where the raw materials are mixed with chemicals in order to produce the products we then buy. Now, some of those chemicals make it through to us in the products, but the vast majority of exposure to these toxic chemicals happens to the people working at this point in the production chain. And very often those people are there because the lands that they have worked in harmony with for so long have become degraded to such an extent that the only jobs left are in these toxic environments. So once produced, these goods are then distributed. And the idea at this point is to move the goods as quickly as possible, to keep prices as low as possible, and to keep people buying as much as possible. And now we get to the heart of the machine, to consumption. And this part is the bit that our governments and businesses are fighting so hard to protect. And one of the very effective methods of doing this is advertising, of bombarding us with messaging to encourage us to continue endlessly consuming, and to think that actually we need to be doing that in order to support our economy. And advertising isn't there to make us feel good about ourselves. It's there to sow those seeds of dissatisfaction, but to make us think that if we buy the latest, the newest, the shiniest, that will help to fill the void. But not so much that when the next version comes out, we don't race for that one. And it encourages us to believe that our value is measured not by who we are, but by what we own. And the other method for encouraging this increased consumption is both perceived and inbuilt obsolescence. Perceived obsolescence being this latest, newest model, looking just different enough that everybody can tell if you haven't got that latest model. and somehow making you feel as though that you should be living up, keeping up with the Joneses. Built-in obsolescence, you will all, I'm sure, be familiar with the frustration of trying to mend something, of going for that part, being unable to buy it, finding out it's in fact cheaper to chuck it than buy an entirely new item. But when we chuck these things, where do they go? And at the moment, we're onto the last part of our chain. It becomes waste. It is disposed of. And at the moment, that means landfill, incineration, or best case scenario, we recycle it. But even if we could recycle everything, it's not the answer. Let's go back to that 7.8 billion tonnes of plastic that's been produced. Of that, roughly around 9% has ever been recycled. And even if we could recycle everything we took out to the curb ready for collection, if we move back up this linear stream, we would find that producing that material had made around 70 bins worth of stuff just to get to the one bin that we're taking out to the curb. So clearly this system is not working. This is not serving us. We need to be moving towards something else, towards this circular economy. But the fantastic thing is that we have got people working to move in this direction, people working to reforest, rewild the land, people looking at cleaner production methods and closing the loop, people championing fair trade and labour rights, and people like us here this evening talking about conscious consumerism. And I think it is important not to underestimate how critical this conversation is, because it changes the power dynamic. When we understand how we are manipulated within this system, it gives us the opportunity to say no, to take a step back, to decide that we don't want to consume in this way, and we do want to demand better. And so I hope that gives a sense of how our consumer choices feed into these bigger global issues that we are seeing. But to finish on a more positive note, I thought we'd have a talk about some really easy changes that you can begin making at home. Now, as we said, this clearly isn't the end of the story. Individual change alone is not going to get to the root of the problem. But I think going away, being able to do something positive and starting that journey is empowering. And I hope that it will then encourage you to go on, learn more, and do further actions. So, if we go on to my last one. So, I thought we'd have a think, first of all, about food shopping, something that comes into our life on a regular basis. Comes in every week, typically huge amounts of single-use packaging. I want you to have a think about your shopping basket for a moment. Just visualise what you can see in there and how much single-use packaging you think there is. And perhaps there's something that you could do differently. Could you buy into a veg box scheme, something which prefaces seasonal, organic, local? Now, organic, I know, is a whole other mindset and a whole other talk. And in our society, it's a privilege to be able to buy in that way. All I would say is, if you feel you can, even for some products, I'd encourage you to do so. When I started on this journey, taking your own container to shops was still a bit of an odd thing. Now, here, over the fish counter in Morrison's, they're encouraging you, bring your own. So please do, take your own. Ask them to put the things that you are buying into your own containers. And make use of the bulk stores. Again, something that has popped up all over the place in the last few years. And we're so lucky here in Hitchin to have the Wholesome Way, and we've got Bamboo Turtle over in Letchworth. A fantastic opportunity. Now, of course, it's not getting rid of all the packaging. We've just been looking at that system. We know there's far more upstream. But they, of course, are able to buy in far larger quantities than we would be able to store at home. And so, making use of that, no-brainer. I also think it's more important, perhaps just showing that this is how we want to consume. This is the model we want to see, rather than the overly packaged alternatives that are out there. Food storage, of course, also important. We waste around 1/3 of all food that is produced globally every single year. And that food, if it makes it into landfill, is not breaking down, is not going back into the system. It's breaking down anaerobically, producing methane. Again, as we've said, a powerful greenhouse gas. So just thinking about what you've got, noting if things are going out of date, make use of your freezer, save it for a later date. Make sure that you prep, you're organised, you've got things ready for lunch, for dinner, so that you're not tired at the end of the day, rushing, getting that pre-packaged, pre-processed food. If we skip now to the bathroom, the other most wasteful space in our home, there's some really simple swaps we can make there just to get us started. Liquids, shampoos, soaps, conditioners, in plastic bottles, really easy to swap those for bar alternatives. And with zero waste becoming a trendy thing of late, there are lots of alternatives, really good things popping up we can make use of. Swapping single-use items like toothbrushes and razors for more sustainable alternatives, buying into bamboo toothbrushes so that when they are finished with, they can go into your compost. Getting a safety razor where all you're swapping is the blade, which you can then recycle. And making use of reusable sanitary products rather than disposable ones. And then similarly with cleaning. Cleaning, the marketer's dream. Do we really need a different spray for every single surface in our house? I think not. Now, in our house, bicarbonate vinegar does most of the things, but I appreciate not everybody might want to go for the full green cleaning just yet. But there's loads of refillable options at our bulk stores, the health food shop, where you can take that same plastic bottle back time and again and gives you another way of doing things. And thinking about what you're cleaning with, sponges, cloths, typically made from plastic, can you instead use something that will be compostable, or even better, that t-shirt that is too moth-eaten to go to the charity shop, cut it up, make it into rags, make it into cloths, and use it around the home. So hopefully just a few things to get you going, to get you thinking about things you can do. But as I say, I hope that won't be the end of your journey. I hope it will spark an interest, that you will want to know more and perhaps join in some other organisations. And my last slide, just a little encouragement to think about these things before any purchase. A really useful sort of mental checklist, just to ask yourself if what you're buying is a want or a need. So if we flick through the last one, but just to say, if you are encouraged to get involved in other things, we have lots of stuff available locally. We have our Extinction Rebellion North Herts, our local group, if you're inspired to climate action. If you're not feeling quite that daring just yet, but want to know a little bit more about individual actions, we've got Less Waste Kitchen, we've got Plastic Free Network, doing fantastic things, helping you to get to grips with your own waste, your own consumption, and finding better ways of tackling that. We've got Transition Town Letchworth, who are putting on a fantastic series of talks, looking at our towns more generally, how we can become more sustainable in our processes. A few things that have dropped off the bottom there. We've got the Best Before Cafe in Letchworth and the Food Rescue Hub in Hitchin, doing fantastic things around food waste. And they're not just there for people who perhaps can't afford those things, they're there for everybody to rescue that food, because there is so much going to waste. And of course we've got organisations like the Green Party who are putting on this fantastic series of talks, who are able to provide more of an overview and offer another way of getting involved. So I really hope that you will go away, you'll have conversations with family and friends about these topics, and that you'll be a positive ripple effect going forward. Thank you.
Stephanie, that's absolutely fantastic, really informative.
Our second speaker now, I'm really, really proud to be introducing you to, and I would like you to welcome very warmly Safia Minney to the stage.
founder of Legal Tree, also author and advisor.
We communicate who we are through clothing. It is fundamentally a part of what we wish to communicate about ourselves.
We used to have a system, a fashion system. That has absolutely nothing to do with the fashion industry today. It has been reinvented.
It's based on materialism. The problem is that comes at a really high price.
Garment factory collapsed, killing more than 1,000.
Clashes between clothes factory workers and riot police in Cambodia.
Last November, 112 people were killed in another major factory fire. 30,000 Chinese workers have been on strike.
Garment workers in Bangladesh paying the price for cheap clothing.
Well, the promise of globalization was that it was going to be a win-win, that consumers in the rich world would get cheaper goods and people in the poorer parts of the world would get jobs, and that those jobs would give them an opportunity to work their way out of poverty.
This enormous, rapacious industry that is generating so much profit, why is it that it is unable to support millions of its workers properly?
The actual business model is completely unsustainable. Unless you change that model, you can't change anything.
When everything is concentrated on making profits, what you see is that human rights, the environment, workers' rights get lost.
My God, we can do better than this.
In 2014, just after the building collapse, some young men from LA came and said to me that they found we were making fashion a sustainable fashion revolution. That they were so horrified that the cost of fashion had meant that thousands of people's lives had been lost in this building collapse. And there's been a series of factory collapses that have resulted in such huge human loss. But they were also waking up to the incredible pollution that the fashion industry produces, that even though there are labour laws, there are environmental laws, these are largely unenforced, that bribery and corruption often means that bribery and corruption often means that the way that the market economy should work doesn't work. If you go on to the next slide. So the documentary has now been seen by about 10 to 12 million people worldwide in fashion companies, in media companies, to really understand why we need a different way of doing business. So I'm going to talk you through how I created Legal Tree 28 years ago in Tokyo, and just give you a bit of a sense of what, for example, putting people and planet central to everything we do can be achieved. So the business is 10 million turnover. That's not a very large company. However, what it does do is it proves that you can drive a business with that mission in place. Just to give you a little bit of perspective on why this is important in terms of the climate crisis and doing things differently, is that the fashion industry today is responsible for 7% of global emissions, and it's set to become 25% of global emissions by 2050 if we continue buying clothes on the trajectory that we currently are. This is with the emerging markets, the so-called developing world, buying clothes at the same speed as we in the so-called first world buy clothes. So there is a huge reason. Fashion is more than both aviation and shipping put together. It is less than agriculture, but it is more than this very, very substantial aviation and shipping. So fashion is a huge ecological nightmare in terms of human rights, in terms of planetary resources, in terms of carbon emissions. So just a quick slide. 28 years ago, in the basket is my 1 month baby, who's now 26 years old. This is the Eco Products exhibition in Tokyo, but one of the first at the time, with lots of fair trade products on the floor. You can see how incredibly handmade it was at the time. So set up as a voluntary group with Global Village, what we would do is we would collate information about how we could recycle, where we could buy organic. We would run seminars and workshops about how to live a more sustainable lifestyle. So very much the kinds of things that we're doing here today. If I can have the next slide. But at the same time, we were aware that we had to find the alternatives. And if the alternative didn't exist, then we had to link up with producers, fair trade groups around the world, those fair trade groups that would put women and the environment central to everything they do. So just to give you a bit of an overview, I think Steph did a brilliant job at explaining just the stats there on waste and especially on plastics. If we look at, for example, business leaders in the UK, 77% of senior execs know that there is modern slavery in their supply chains. So UK law passed something called the Modern Slavery Act at the end of 2015. And what this meant was that any company with turnover more than 36 million has to report what it's doing to eradicate slavery in its supply chains. And for many of us, that might come as a shock that in this day and age there is still slavery in our supply chains. And what this means is bonded and forced labour, it means child labour, it means human trafficking, and it also means excessive overtime. So typically, the garment factory workers that I interviewed over the last 2 or 3 decades, obviously conventional, working for conventional brands and factories, will be working for an average of about 77 to 80 hours a week with 2 days off every month. The clothing industry is the second largest polluter in the world, and let's not forget that global emissions contribution that's made. However, 78% of the world's population are living in rural areas, and there are ways of actually using traditional techniques in rural environments to create beautiful garments and actually put food on the table, good life, with good prices, and help community development within those rural areas. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is my last book, Slave to Fashion, which is about modern slavery, which involved going and meeting people who had been victims of modern slavery, who were caught in modern slavery, and that most of them had now been freed from it. But they were telling me their stories. There are, of course, still people, there are children in the garment industry. There are limited numbers of hours, for example, that a 14-year-old or 16-year-old can work, but largely that law is entirely ignored. So if you look at, I don't know how many of you use Twitter, but there are a series of films under Slave to Fashion, if you'd like to see some short films that bring these chapters alive. You can have the next slide. So that journey was very much going into the factories, pretending that I was a buyer in a conventional fashion brand, but also then going into the slums where these garment factory workers lived, and sitting on their beds, which were typically, their room was about the size of your or my bathroom, and they would have a small chest where they would keep their Sunday best. They might keep a few photographs. They would keep their plates. They might have 2 or 3 plates. They would typically queue behind a burner with 2 rings, 20 different families or coupled would wait in turn to cook their rice and their dal. And that would be the typical situation of a garment factory worker and their living conditions. And that still is very much how garment factory workers live in India or Bangladesh. Next slide, please. And already, 30 years ago, we were seeing the impact of climate change. We planted an organic cotton field that disappeared completely. It was not an area that was used to having huge floods. There are parts of Bangladesh, of course, that have regular floods, but the whole island and whole fields were taken away. So it is part of regular life in many nations that floods come and floods go. But what we're seeing now is incredibly erratic weather patterns, which are seriously undermining the ability of people to put food on the table. This is a community of migrant farmers on the northwest part of Bangladesh. India is on the left-hand side of the photograph. Next slide, please. So the vision was very much to use handicraft skills, to use natural materials, to work with producer groups, suppliers of the garment and fashion industry, but to work with fair trade groups in a long-term partnership, and using that long-term partnership to develop new product ideas, to procure, to bring in new materials that were natural. So, for example, we would work with organic cotton, we would work with, for example, metal, we would work with different forms of seagrass fibre to make clothes, to make crafts. But taking those jobs and creating and designing products using true sustainable materials that could then be crafted in those villages would enable us to generate really strong incomes. There's one peninsula, for example, of 4 fair trade routes we counted over 20 years, that there's nearly £2 million worth of revenue that came into that village estuary. This is a recycled sari. This is a recycled sari that's being upcycled into a blanket, and we developed about 30 or 40 different products that we sell in our Japanese supply chain. We have about 800 shops that sell poetry. So what does that long-term partnership mean? Well, it means bringing, if you like, the experience of the market to the people that are making the product. And it means bringing the buyers and the consumers to understand how the people that are making the products actually live. And through brokering that partnership, incredible things happen. I remember we had a huge flood in Bangladesh. It covered 70% of the country. And we had to first help with relief aid. People were living on the top of their houses for about 3 weeks. We had to help with dropping medical supplies. But people were happy to wait more than 3 months for their products because they knew how important buying that product was. And I think this is something that we've kind of forgotten. We've forgotten that there are people behind the products that we buy. And when we learn how those products are made and how incredibly impactful we can be in using a more conscious consumption, there's a real power in that. Next slide. So over the years, I've brought out celebrities and journalists and opinion makers, and this is Emma Watson. She was 19 years old. She came to me and said it would be fantastic to make a collection that really spoke to her generation. And this was the beginning of making collections because she came out to Bangladesh to really understand and learn more about how fast fashion and conventional fashion is made and how fair trade fashion could really make a difference to communities' lives. So she's wearing hand-woven fabric, as you can see, this lovely hand-weave that follows. The next slide. So the collection was launched in Tokyo, in Europe. If I can have the next slide. And what it did is it brought the notion of organic cotton, it brought the craft skills of hand-weaving, hand-knitting, to a whole different generation, a whole different type of people. because I think some of us will probably remember when fair trade was, about kind of rather, chemically types of clothing, and I think it had a new image to really create, to drive interest in. So supporting that organic cotton supply chain, we were the first we've got Global Organic Textile certified, and this was not just about getting a fibre that was truly sustainable and truly biodegradable, but it was also about empowering the farmer, because we could pay them more, they in that way could then invest in things like indigenous seed banks and drip irrigation to reduce the water that was being used. As you know, possibly cotton is a cash crop, so of course it's not the only thing that a small-scale farmer will produce. They'll be growing vegetables, eggplant, tomatoes, they'll be growing lentils, green gram, for example, in other fields, and they'll rotate the cotton. And by bringing the hand weavers in Bangladesh to meet with the organic cotton farmers, we were able to set up a new supply chain. And this then helped with both coming to us in 2007 for collaboration, to really look at how international designers could work with organic and fair trade crafted textiles. And what that did is it profiled to a whole different market, a high fashion market, and helped us to open up some incredible boutiques to sustainable fashion. And today, of course, sustainable fashion and circular economy materials, things like fabrics made out of reclaimed fishing nets and other reclaimed materials have become something that are very, very widely available. That's quite a recent phenomenon, really, just in the last 10 years or so. Next slide. So taking designers to the field, taking journalists to the field. In this way, we were able to invite other people to tell the story of what sustainable business, of what sustainable fashion could look like. Next slide. So these are some of the marks that we find. So Fair Trade will be the first company to be Fair Trade certified throughout the supply chain. So that was from field through all the different stages of production, ginning, spinning, also the different tiers of manufacture, and the process that we use to buy. I think these are some of the things that have really helped to develop and to support some of the new thinking around circular economy production. So designing in natural materials, I was managing director at Kilzu, a footwear brand, so using alternatives to leather like unalcoholic fibres of Pintex there, using coconut fibre, cork. If we use leather, then it's free leather, natural fair trade rubber, and of course organic cotton. Next slide. And then when we're designing and using natural material, and also using traditional craft skills to really generate as much work as possible. Next slide. So, as Steph made very clear, we've got plastics absolutely everywhere, and I think one of the biggest problems with fashion is that so much of it is synthetic. More than 2/3 of fashion is synthetic, which means that the microfibers, when you wash the clothing, reaching out into the waterways, more than 83% now of tap water, wherever you are in the world, is now polluted with microfibers that are. This is a slide here that shows plankton and these 1 to 5 millimetre length microfibers. So incredibly serious pollution. So the fair trade movement, these are the 10 fair trade principles, and if you go onto the website, you will know the ideas behind fair trade. I think reduced slave to fashion. What came out very, very clearly was the need for freedom of association and also the the need for a fair wage, which is kind of for. And I think we've recently been moving into, for example, last week there was a conference at the organisation that looked at re-strengthening the environmental principle into one that covers the climate crisis, because of course the members of the fair trade community are the first to be feeling the effects of climate change. So if we can just speed through, so this is the Sustainable Development Goals, much of that work has moved into that. We can move through this one, the next slide, yeah. So the movement really has now taken off in many large department stores, so Selfridges, for example, have been curating designers who are using circular fashion, circular economy fabrics, new methods in creating fabrics that's actually fine for refit. To really showcase that doing fashion in a different way is possible, but after the shocks of luxury fashion burning millions and millions of pounds worth of stock just to keep the value of their stock up, that it is totally unacceptable. And so I think that there is definitely a very good movement now to look at what sustainable fashion might look like, but if we're honest, it isn't fast enough. If we can move on to the next slide. So what we've been recently doing, inspired very much by Extinction Rebellion, is that many progressive leaders, business leaders have come together and have made a forum called Business Declares, a time of political emergency. And this is now bringing in progressive business people to give them support in how they can declare times of emergency and what kind of actions can follow. We can move to the next slide. So it's a mix of the kinds of sustainable, pioneering brands like Body Shop, Ecotricity, Teas, for example, but also some of the big industry names, the former CEO of Unilever, for example, and others who have been very active in this space. We can move to the next slide. And I think without question, business is a very, very powerful influence for change. We're now looking at other parts of the financial community coming out and really understanding that the stock market is looking at a 3.9 degree rise in climate, that this is utterly unsustainable. So many insurance companies are really now stepping into the space and really very active in redefining what financial markets should be looking at. So, this is a presentation actually that I produced for some business people who are working in chemical companies, and I think that there is now an appetite to start looking at climate emergency, at how business needs to shift, the speed at which business needs to shift. And I think the pressure that the Extinction Rebellion and the school strikes protests have put on media to tell the truth, the institutions and business have really started to create a very, very powerful shift. So those of us that have been involved with the protests, we must keep up the work. I think the language change also is now beginning to be very much acknowledged by the business community, and really looking at an emergency as opposed to talking about climate change, as everyone has been talking about for the last 30 years. Again, people, the business community, the financial community, again, understanding that we're pretty much locked in now at 1.5 degrees, that we have to do everything we possibly can. Business communities, different sectors are talking about. Different sectors are talking about going zero carbon by 2030. Can they reduce 80% by 2030. Other businesses are talking about doing it by 2025. But clearly, for businesses to be aiming 2050 is just too late. And I think that awakening is happening. This is a slide that I often show in my business talks, and I think people again are feeling frightened. They are beginning to understand that their daughters, their grandchildren are coming to them and asking for change, and they're beginning to really embrace that need for transition. I think we covered it obviously in Steph's talk, and many of you are active members of the Green Party against the rebellion, so this is all very old news for you. But for those of us who are alive and well in 1984, today we have half the sea ice. That's how much we've lost. And these stats and these visuals are now things that are beginning to shake every institution and company organisation. So biodiversity loss, habitat loss, the risk management side to supply chains now is becoming a huge topic, and I think that we are at a point now where if we continue to really push, we will see a large number of businesses moving in the right direction and really using their activism to change the shape of the out-of-date economic system. We can move to the next slide. So taking a much more systems change approach, really looking at a circular economy, really reinventing, if you like, the notion of intelligence. I think looking at diversity in the context of how we build new intelligence to really decide together. And I think that very much is also something that's echoed in things like the citizens' assembly approach, that is now in the business community looking like a genuine attempt to begin to bring a multi-stakeholder approach, which will make a very big difference. Let's go to the last slide. So I'd like to invite Steph back up onto the stage and invite you to ask any questions that you might have. Would you like to come up?
We're going to have a microphone floater, so hopefully you can be heard clearly.
Any questions for our fantastic speakers this evening? Lady down
Hi there. I was wondering your opinion on the state of fashion, the government papers, which pretty much everybody suggesting was disregarded as a possible answer to the fashion, issue in the UK. Can you see that turning around, or maybe other options coming into place at the back?
Yes, I think there's a real need for legislation. We're very far away from it. With the London Fashion Week, for example, there were a number of us that called for boycott of London Fashion Week, in the same way that in Stockholm, the Fashion be a reset, and I think you're absolutely right. A big disappointment around charging a penny to really reflect the beginnings of this wave of product. So without legislation, we won't have something that will slow down the production of fashion. I think citizens' awareness has led us to a point where increasingly you see young people who are very, very happy to walk around expressive clothes and their hair things, and really have to buy stuff in hand as opposed to new, and if it's new then it should be sustainable. But I think without a strong legislative framework, I would like to see that every container of garments that are brought in, that the consumer would be confident that those products were made without slavery, and they were made with respect of the environmental laws of the country where they've been produced. I think that's absolutely necessary. But we do have always go for that.
If we are to consume a great deal less, because however you consume, you are using materials, how does that square then with great companies like People Tree? If we all start buying a great deal less, and so they sell a lot much less, and all the people who work for you have less income, how do we sort that out?
I think it's whichever fashion company it is, what we have to start doing is to be, at the moment, if you break down the price of the garment, firstly, the materials cost, the labour cost is so incredibly tiny. What we have to do is we have to increase the labour cost. And the way that you can do that is that you can use, for example, organic cotton, which has been taking pests by hand, for example, for the farmer, which therefore respects the fertility of the soil, waterways, etc., etc. We will pay more for organic cotton, organic cotton. For example, if you start using handcraft skills like hand weaving, hand knitting, hand block printing, etc., and embroidery, you will again start using more labour. So you'll find that there's more labour, but less material as that price of the product. So if we're buying less, but the value added, so the labour component is more, we will be supporting more families for that garment. So if you were to ask me, can I buy one of those every week and then throw it away the following week, the answer would be no, because it would be more expensive. We will treasure it more, and we will hopefully look after it and love it and wear it for 5 or 10 or 15 years. So it's a switch to a different culture of production and a different culture of consumption.
I'm thinking about acknowledgement that we all need to pay more for what we're buying, one that respects every person involved in that production as well as the brand, and that we need to move away from the affordability and the finishing cost case, that we spend more or less and less more.
Hence the true cost, the cost of the labour.
I'm just thinking about sort of both sides of that. I think that moving towards caring for our climate has to go hand in hand with climate justice as well. We can't do one without the other.
I think perhaps how do you feel about, because of the growing awareness and, as Steph said, the now trendiness, if you like, how do people understand what is true and what is greenwashing? Because you have companies like Zara and companies like H&M who have effectively said that they're doing all this stuff, and then when you actually dig into it further, they're just as bad as they always were. They're just spinning things so they sound greener. So how do companies like yourself battle against that? You get kind of frustrated that, I mean,
Yes, good question. And it's very difficult for a small trade and ethical brand to compete on an unlevel playing field. It's a race to the bottom. Clothes are cheaper now than they were 20, 30 years ago. I think, in answer to your question, if you look at the ethical consumerism, they had a lovely feature in the last issue, which I think went through on a large number of different factors, which companies were producing better fashion. Nothing is best, unfortunately, of the conventional fashion. I mean, most things do have slavery within the supply chain. I'm afraid that's reality. I think the elephant in the room is the level of production and the level of consumption. We cannot continue producing and consuming 130 billion garments a year. It's just insane. So I think that the trusted elements would be looking at supporting the pioneers. It doesn't matter if it's people can be a pioneer. Welfare trade, which is guaranteeing fair trade through the supply chain. Organic, natural materials is important. I think the first thing to do is to really ask, tidy up your wardrobe and re-style and look at what you've got in your wardrobe. Very often you'll find that you don't need to buy new, or you buy second-hand, or you swap, or you make or end. And if it's new, then it should be ethical, it should be sustainable. Personally, I think it should be handcrafted, because if we were to do that, we would be supporting a family in the Kathmandu Valley, or we would be supporting a handweaving community in Bangladesh. And my God, those artisans, incredible skills, they really deserve to have some kind of economic lifeline.
I also think it's up to us as consumers to do our own homework. We need to look at the brands, and you might be saying one thing, but actually if you start digging around in that website, do they have the policies that are supporting all of these things? Is it just a front? I think a small amount of digging can reveal quite a bit, and I think we have to take more responsibility to look into what we're purchasing as well.
There's also a good app called Good On You, which curates fashion brands, and it covers everything from veganism to fair trade. So Good On You is yeah.
Anybody else? I think it's one of them.
Great talk. You were mentioning about the lack of enforcement for these laws, to the outfit and breed and stuff. Have you seen any cases where that has changed, and if so, what has motivated the change? What have you heard the changes?
Good question. I think the increase in citizens' awareness and pressure on brands. I think shareholder activism is also a really powerful thing. The big one also is businesses that are progressive enough. For example, the Modern Slavery Act came into being, the supply chain part of it came into being because large companies, through the Ethical Trade Initiative, wanted to have a level playing field. So in order to do that, they were saying, look, what we're trying to do is eradicate slavery from our supply chains, but if that isn't the norm, we're no longer competitive. So it was leading and pushing for that to be part of the new act that has begun to create something as government legislation that's going in place that will give a bit more teeth to the Modern Slavery Act by the end of this year. But as I say, I think there's still a long way to go.
One last question. We'll have to make this the last one.
I wonder what your thoughts are on people in developing countries who get some of their clothing and their stuff from all the stuff we throw out when they go to involved with a charity that provides sustainable sanitary kits for girls who live in Africa and other countries or other continents around the world. They actually buy their pants from the second-hand markets. I wonder.
It's really disruptive.
I'm not at all in favour of us having stuff and chucking it all out.
Yes.
But I know that they are reliant on those because they can't afford to buy products.
Yes, and very often it's because it's our clothing is destroying their indigenous textile economy. So in Zimbabwe, for example, in the early 90s, when charity training started arriving from the UK, what had been a very healthy garment sector was largely undermined by charity production. And I think certainly the true cost and other documentaries go into that too, a very harmful thing. The reality is that we have on the planet today enough clothing to clothe ourselves for the next 10, 15 years. So it is a very difficult situation, isn't it? We need to dispose of that responsibly. We need to also think about how we bring new people into the debate around consumption, around, as Steph quite rightly said, that seduction through advertising. I'm not enough as I bought something, this season, this bag, this colour. We really need to start working on the health, our physical and psychological health within our garments. And that's, I guess, so much of what we've been talking about comes in. I think it's also sort of a healthy reminder that we need to be conscious consumers, and that throwing things away, we think, we can just put it into a charity shop. That's not necessarily the end of that story. It isn't going into a charity shop in my local town to be bought by somebody down the road. It's ending up somewhere else, destroying another indigenous way of life. So just our levels of consumption for us have to come right down because the ramifications are huge.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I can't thank you ladies enough. It's been such an informative talk this evening, and you bringing your expertise and wisdom and advice to us here at the Town Hall. Will you please say a huge thank you to Stephanie Killingbeck and Safia. Thank you. Amazing.